to be here today. And I do want to just acknowledge Linda's leadership. I mentioned to her earlier, I find the work that she's doing incredibly inspiring. And I really welcome the fact that she has created a vehicle and a place where we can share our stories and learn from each other. So I'm going to start. Oh, first glitch. I can't get the slide to move. And it moved earlier.
Yeah, just your sidebars should be, if you might have to press them a few times, your left and right arrows, or your up and down arrows.
It's not working.
Okay, you might just have to drop it down out of full screen and play with it that way. We are horse people. We are flexible.
Okay, let's try this again.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to just start and give you a little bit of context around the main intent. We are an equine learning facility that is located in Indian River, Ontario, which is just northeast of Toronto and 15 minutes outside of Peterborough. We offer health and wellness workshops. We do individual and team effectiveness coaching, leadership development, team building. We also offer programming in resilience and life skills. Our programming is strengths-based and trauma-informed. And it's also been informed by my own training in facilitated equine experiential learning, or FEEL, and somatic experiencing, and other modalities. So if you're interested in learning more about our offering, I've listed the website there. What I will say is I established the main intent in 2014. This is our 6th year. I'll talk a little bit about myself in the next slide, but really initially I thought when I launched this social enterprise that my focus would be on corporate work, because that's really my background. But what's actually come to me is trauma. So I've had sort of a crash course in working with an increasing number of people who are processing trauma. And really the focus of my practice has been collaborating with other mental health professionals and allied individuals, supporting individuals in that way. So a little bit about myself. So I am the program director and the owner of the Main Intent. Essentially, my husband and I, instead of downsizing, we upsized and purchased a farm 10 years ago. And I said to my husband, you know, I think I'd like to get a horse. I discovered horses late in life. At the time, I was 48. And so I bought this horse on Kijiji, which is really not the best place to buy a horse. This is the horse here. His name is Sunny. And I will share with you that Sunny is my heart horse and has taught me a tremendous amount about myself and how I respond to different types of situations. And it was my experience with Sunny that actually motivated me to take the field training in 2013. And I took the training from Horse Spirit Connections. I know many people know Wendy and Andre. And I really went into the training program not really knowing what I was going to do with it, just knowing that I wanted to have a deeper relationship with my horse and the horses that subsequently became part of our herd. So in the context of this presentation, I'm also the overall project manager and the equine-assisted learning supervisor for building internal resilience through horses, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I'm currently working on a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology. I'll be starting in September a 7-month placement with a social worker based in Coburg. I have a certificate in trauma counseling for frontline workers. I have taken some training with the fundamentals of natural lifemanship. As I mentioned, I'm partway through the somatic experiencing professional training. And on top of all that, I have 25 years of management consulting experience. So as I noted, my background's actually corporate. My focus professionally has been change management, communications, and community investment. So a little bit about me. Who is our team? So we have a wonderful herd of horses. It's a mixed herd. There's 8 full-size horses. We have 2 minis and 2 donkeys. And I also work with a team. My core team of facilitators who work with me are all also field trained. They include Bev Clifton, Tori Poe, and Susan Hardy. Some of you may know who they are. And I'm also just going to mention here too, in case you have not been exposed to her work, I have worked with Paula Josa Jones, and I will mention Paula because Paula's done a couple of workshops at our farm. She's an award-winning choreographer, but she does a lot of work in somatic experiencing and movement with horses. And her book is called Our Horses Ourselves, Discovering the Common Body. And I'm happy to share that as a resource, maybe on the Facebook page. But it's a great addition to your library if you're interested. So the focus of my topic today is a program called Building Internal Resilience Through Horses. It's a trauma-informed, evidence-based community program for young women living with interpersonal trauma. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program and how it came about. I'm going to talk about our research results. It's actually a research project. And then I'm going to share with you some exciting news, or a milestone for us is the publication of the program manual. So what I will share, though, because I think it's important, is the way this particular project came about is several years ago in 2016, I attended a Community Foundation of Greater Peterborough workshop on community partnerships. I'm a big fan of community partnerships. I think you can accomplish a lot when you collaborate with others. And also present at that workshop was the executive director of the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. That conversation turned into another meeting, and we decided that we would collaborate and apply for some funding that became available. And then we would also find a researcher who focused on resilience, and that researcher was Dr. Katja Kiefer, from Trent University. So the three program partners that that are really part of this particular initiative are the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. So KSAC, I'll refer to them, is a not-for-profit charitable organization that provides sexual assault services and public education. They serve the city of Peterborough, the city of Kawartha Lakes, and they also provide services throughout the county of Peterborough and Northumberland, and Halliburton. So for those who don't know, these are surrounding communities around the Peterborough area. Our research partner is the Trent University Emotion and Health Research Laboratory. So Trent is our local university. They're a public liberal arts and science oriented university. Their main campus is in Peterborough. They also have one in Oshawa, serving Durham region. And their Emotion and Health Research Laboratory really promotes research activities that extend current knowledge around emotions, health, and success in life, resilience, and they take their knowledge and they translate it into practice through different programming. They also train new researchers, educators, and healthcare professionals. And then I've just shared with you about the main intent. In terms of the Building Internal Resilience Through Horses program, I'll just speak to the roles. So KSAC was the program lead, and they had a social worker and a mental health professional who was accountable for participant screening and recruitment, the psychoeducational component and content of the program. They also facilitated the expressive arts and grounding activities and provided follow-up counseling to the participants if required as well. Trent was our research partner, so they were accountable for ensuring that the Research Ethics Review Board of Trent University provided approval for our project, and they designed the overall research structure and implemented the research as well, obviously. And then my role, because of my business background, I was the overall project manager for the project and implemented the equine-assisted learning component of it as well. So our program funder is the Public Health Agency of Canada. So at the time of our application, they had an innovation strategy supporting the health of victims of domestic violence and child abuse through community programs. And so this was pretty significant because we were one of 150 agencies from across Canada to apply for the funding, and we were one of 20 organizations to successfully receive the funding. So in January 2017, we had an event here at the farm where our local MP announced that we had received the initial contribution fund of 464,000, almost 465,000. And that was our initial funding for the project, the research project. And then in 2019, we received extension funding of around 158,000. And so the project includes, I'm going to talk about some of these components, but the project is more than an equine-assisted learning initiative. That was a key part of it, obviously, the research part of that, but it also included a number of community capacity building initiatives. So we have a website called invitingresilience.ca that provides community resources around the topic of resilience and trauma. We hosted a number of resilience community events for families and healthcare professionals in 2018. Last year, we hosted the Inviting Resilience Conference at Trent University, where we had a call for proposals, and we had 2 days of learning from different experts in the area of resilience and trauma-informed programming. Earlier this year, actually, we hosted a somaticing experiencing workshop with Sarah Schlotte, who you will hear from tomorrow as part of this conference. And then we have just recently published and made available the program manual. So I'll speak to some of those elements as I go forward. The project is also part of an initiative called the Knowledge Hub. And this is a trauma and violence informed health promotion community of practice that is being led by the Western University Center of Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. And for those who don't know, Western is a fairly large university located in London, Ontario. And their role is really to consolidate the knowledge across all of these 20 different projects. And they're also focused on building community capacities through the different initiatives that I've mentioned. And ultimately, the goal is to contribute to the evidence base for trauma and violence-informed health promotion. So I'm going to start by just providing a few slides around trauma and resilience to set some context and background around our particular program, and again, just do a little community capacity building as part of my own presentation. So how do we define trauma? So a trauma can be a single experience or multiple experience. It might include, in this context, exposure to family violence, child abuse, dating violence, sexual violence, and ultimately the event might overwhelm the individual's ability to cope or to integrate the ideas and emotions that are that define that particular experience. But typically it will have a traumatic experience that sticks, has 3 common elements. It's unexpected, the person was unprepared, or there was nothing the person could do to stop it from happening. It's sort of beyond your control. So it's not so much the event that determines whether it's traumatic or not to somebody, but it's the individual's event and the meaning that they make of it. So trauma impacts, it's pervasive in our society. Actually, as I'm discovering, it impacts individuals, families, cultures. You know, we speak of intergenerational trauma. Service providers like frontline workers, specifically, you know, thinking even in the context of COVID, a number of our frontline workers might be exposed to what they call vicarious trauma, and it can be organizational as well. And the traumatic event tends to become the organizing principle from which somebody lives their life. So they're always trying to cope and avoid the impact of the trauma. It can be both a conscious or an unconscious awareness experience. And we might, and we refer to sort of the trauma response or the stress response as a fight, flight, freeze, or an appease response to different stimuli. So what does that mean? Well, if you're the fight response, it might mean that you react to situations through fighting, physically, yelling, screaming, crying. You might want to try to run away. The flight response, if you've experienced the flight response, you might be fidgety, you might want to move in your chair. The freeze response might be not talking, going numb, disassociating, or the appease response, which is sometimes reflected in those who've experienced sexual violence, is the idea of being overly nice to somebody who's hurting us to encourage them to stop. So just something to think about. And trauma can be very disruptive. Essentially, experiences of trauma heighten the sensitivity of the brain's emotional neural circuits. So think about it. We all have a little amygdala. It's this little almond-shaped part in the back of your brain. If we our amygdala is really a muscle, think of it as a muscle that's designed to keep us safe. So if we feel threat or stress, it triggers that fight, flight, freeze response. And what happens is it overrides all of those prefrontal cortex ways of working that are involved in emotion regulation and self-control. So by its very nature, a traumatic experience is one that is unexpected. I've mentioned that, but it essentially, it impacts our emotion regulation, our sense of mastery, and our sense of relatedness and how we interact with others. Um, um, and these trauma-induced neurological changes can manifest in increased emotional reactivity, chronic hyperarousal, so you're kind of jumpy, you might be impulsive, act out, you might use substances, or you might engage in self-destructive behaviors. So in the example of a young person, you might cut, something to that effect. We also might view ourselves in a different way because of our traumatic experiences. So we might see ourselves as incompetent, unworthy, incapable, not good enough. So we sort of lose our sense of agency over life outcomes. And in the case of repeated trauma, we would feel a sense of helplessness and hopelessness over the future. So having close bonds with others is really a fundamental human need, and when those social connections are severed because of a traumatic event, some of us actually literally get sick and die. So experiencing violence or neglect at the hands of a person we trust and depend on, or witnessing violence in the environment where we ought to feel safe, can really impact our core beliefs and how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us. These learned beliefs really shape how we create relationships with others, and that's what we sometimes refer to as intergenerational trauma, because what happens is we tend to get caught in a cycle of victimization, violence, and repeated abuse. So what is resilience? Well, being resilient doesn't mean that a person doesn't feel any pain or sadness or distress in the response to trauma or life adversity. We all experience suffering of some sort. These reactions are experienced by everyone. But resilience resides in how we make sense of or deal with a traumatic experience. And it's also not an inherent trait that somebody either has or doesn't have. It's actually a learned way of thinking, feeling, and acting that can be developed in anyone. And although resilience may appear to originate from an individual, it's actually enabled by caring and supportive relationships, ones that nurture a sense of personal dignity and agency, interpersonal connectedness and trust, and a hopeful outlook for the future. So it's really a prevention mindset. It's an intervention for someone today that is prevention for their children tomorrow. So we see building resilience as a capacity building approach. Just again, acknowledging that we all experience suffering in some way, shape, or form, and that adversity can happen to anyone. And so all of us can benefit by becoming and learning to become more resilient. So resilience is really how we make sense of and move past painful experiences. And this is a quote from Dr. Ann Masden. It does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of ordinary normative human resources in the minds, brains, and bodies of children, in their families and relationships, and in their communities. So as I noted, these are competencies that can be learned and developed. They're applicable to everyone regardless of circumstances, and they can be cultivated through nurturing relationships and their environment. So building internal resilience through horses is really based on what we call a multi-factor, multi-level model of resilience that's reflected here, which recognizes that resilient outcomes are maximized by building a combination of psychological, relational, and community resources. And again, this is based on the work of Dr. Ann Masden. And so there's a myriad of individual factors that can contribute to psychosocial resilience, and they're grouped essentially into three different categories. There's emotion regulation, there's a sense of mastery, and a sense of relatedness. And they represent the basic psychological functions that are essential for positive youth development. And they can also be disrupted by traumatic experiences. So our focus was really on the focus of the program was really on these three broad clusters. So just to give you some more context, so emotion regulation is it's just being aware of your own emotions and the emotions of others, understanding and using emotions as information, and having a toolkit of strategies that you can use to help you stay regulated when you're coping with stress. A sense of mastery is having a positive outlook about ourselves and others and our future. It's about self-worth, self-confidence, self-efficacy, having a sense of optimism and agency over our life. And a sense of relatedness really reflects our fundamental need for social connection. So trust, belonging, needing that feeling of being included, loved, supported. And it also includes the mutual reciprocation of these needs within our relationships and our families and those around us. So the factors in resilience, so just to build on that, so emotion regulation can be enhanced by becoming mindful of our emotions, allowing ourselves to experience emotions. I mentioned naming emotions, but noting the emotions that come up for us without attaching judgment to them, understanding what triggers our emotions, and I mentioned expanding our repertoire of emotion regulation strategies. So that might mean things like yoga, expressive arts, meditation, humor, nature. There's many different things and ways, spending time with horses that teach us about emotion regulation. We build a sense of mastery by reinforcing and cultivating what we consider our islands of competence. So the things that we're good at and the things that we enjoy doing. So, it's interesting listening to Linda talk about her equine leadership magazine. So obviously she's very good very good at pulling together people and creating those connections. So it's about goal setting, it's about planning, it's about introducing problem-solving skills, rewarding ourselves for successful accomplishments and tasks, forgiving ourselves if we make a mistake, recognizing that we're human. It's also about helping others. So not just self-compassion for ourselves, but self-compassion for those within our community. So it might be reinforced through volunteering, taking responsibility at home, at school, in the context of a young person. And then finally, we foster a sense of relatedness by cultivating and routinely practicing social skills. So things like active listening. So it's interesting, this morning on Jennifer's workshop, we know we had an opportunity to practice active listening, good communication skills, understanding what healthy boundaries are, again, just and having the ability to understand when it's okay to seek help from others, and express gratitude to those who offer a helping hand. So those are the 3 areas that our program focused on. So horses, if you're a horse person, I probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this particular slide, but this presentation has been delivered to a lot of audiences that are not necessarily horse people. But horses obviously have evolved with a strong sense of awareness of their senses and their environment, and recognizing that what's happening in their environment and who's in their environment is key to their survival. So they take in the energy of those around them, the subtle body movements, facial expressions, quality of breath, all of those signals that we're sending out that we're not necessarily conscious of, the horses are taking in and providing feedback. With authenticity and without judgment, I characterize them as nature's greatest coaches. And so they help us create connected relationships. They help us actually, meet a number of the factors related to resilience. So decreased hyperarousal, they encourage us to express ourselves authentically, develop stronger communication skills, and they also promote self-esteem and self-awareness. So, and I think it's important to note as well, in the context of working with vulnerable youth, they enable us to experience the therapeutic effects of unconditional acceptance. So these are a few of the horses from our herd who were part of the program, and I'll just talk, just thought I'd mention that as well. So what is building internal resilience through horses? So this was a free 12-week program that included 8 weeks of equine-assisted learning that combined expressive arts, psychoeducation, and working in partnership with horses. It was complemented with a 1-month, 6-month, and 12-month check-in or booster sessions. The program objectives, and these are objectives, so this is part of this reflects essentially our application for funding. So our intent was to design and build an innovative community program with strong evaluative outcomes, to build resilience for young women who have experienced trauma due to domestic violence or child abuse within the family home, to demonstrate that equine-assisted learning is an effective intervention for building resilience in young women who have experienced trauma, and to build capacity for trauma-informed practice in the community of Peterborough for service practitioners who are working with young women who've experienced trauma, to fill a gap in information and resources on resiliency initiatives for young women who've experienced trauma, to enhance integration and knowledge exchange across community services, including First Nations services for young women, so that they will experience the opportunity to build capacity and resiliency to reduce the risk of future harm, and then ultimately to produce a manual that includes the research project and the program so that it can be replicated in other parts of Canada and perhaps around the world. And I will just take a moment here to pause and note that in our community, we have 2 First Nations communities that are that were also we had a number of participants who were from those communities, but we have also delivered different versions of this program, for example, through the First People's House of Learning at Trent University, and to young people from Curve Lake First Nation, for example, or Hiawatha First Nation. So so the program can be, and how we did that as well, just reflecting, I'm going to get into the details of program, but just to give you an idea, so we might have reflected some cultural differences. So we might have started off our circle with the smudge, and there'd be an elder present, but I'm sharing this so you know that the program can be adapted to reflect different cultural influences. So in terms of the program itself, participants learn about trauma and how it impacts our bodies and our overall health. They learn strategies to assist with emotional regulation. They learn coping strategies for self-care, grounding, how to form trust and relationship with other group members. They learn how to assert healthy boundaries, managing choices, obstacles, and challenges, developing confidence and personal awareness, communication and leadership skills, how to vision success and believe in their potential to achieve what's possible. And I will share as well that the participants in the program were well supported as part at each night. I'm going to go and I'll go through what each night or what each session would have looked like. But there were 2 EAL. There's an EAL supervisor, myself, and another EAL facilitator. There's a social worker or a mental health professional, and probably one, depending on the group, 1 or 2 volunteers, depending on the group size. So the participants were well supported. So this is an overall outline of the program. The first night, the participants would have participated in an orientation or a welcome session at Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. Then they come out to the farm for Welcome the Herd, and then there's a session on setting boundaries, self-care, growing forward, which is sort of a leading activity, supporting your best self, learning to express your needs when your body speaks. It's a mindfulness focus. Standing tall as our celebration, and then the celebration at the farm, sort of like the last night at the farm, and then the different booster sessions. And really the focus of each of the sessions, it's a combination of, I would say, group and individual work, and some of them were reflective and some of them were task oriented. So there was a bit of a mix depending on what resonated with you. And I will share as well, because I'm going to talk about the research as I get into the presentation, but the reason we kind of landed on this is a little different than where we started in the first year. So in the first year, when we first launched the research, so there's an assessment process, and I'll explain that, but essentially there's the pre-group assessment, and then they do the program, and initially it was going to be, we were sort of looking at 2 different ways of structuring the program. So the first way we were going to look at it was they would get 8 weeks of equine-assisted learning sessions, and then they would get 4 weeks of psychoeducation with a focus on resilience. And they would get, so we were kind of using the 4 weeks of psychoeducation as, I can't think of the word right now, but a comparative to the EAL. And then the second part of that was they would start with 4 weeks of the psychoeducation, and then they get the 8 weeks of equine-assisted learning. And what we quickly learned was in that first group, that was the 8 weeks of equine-assisted learning, nobody showed up for the 4 weeks of psychoeducation that was hosted at the KSAC office. And similarly, we had sort of mixed attendance at the first 4 psychoeducation, and then attendance with the 8 weeks. So So by combining the program, essentially what we did was we said, okay, well, let's have our orientation the first night, meet and greet, whatever, where we do some of the assessments. So at the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre, and then what we did was we sprinkled the psychoeducation, or we built the psychoeducation into each of the equine-assisted learning sessions. So that way, I think we were able to maximize participation and engagement in the program with this particular audience. So a session outline, the sessions were they're typically 2 hours, and we would start with an opening circle that would have, a check-in, we'd take attendance, we would provide an outline of the session. Then we would do an individual or group type of equine activity. Obviously, we talk about safety guidelines, we outline and set up the exercise, they do the exercise, and then there'd be questions for processing. They were encouraged to do so in some individual self-reflection and journaling after each activity, and then there would be group discussion. We might have an expressive arts activity, and then participants were invited to provide feedback, and then we would close the circle. So that's kind of the outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we incorporated trauma and violence informed principles into the program, and the principles that we incorporated or reflected in terms of structure and content were acknowledgement that trauma is pervasive, safety, trust, choice and control, compassion, strengths-based, collaborative, and evaluation. So what does that mean? So in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to provide a little additional context around how these principles were reflected in the actual program. So around acknowledgement, certainly in our area, Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre and the Building Internal Resilience Through Horses program acknowledges trauma in their work and in this particular program. And I think it was in 2015 that KSAC completed a community needs assessment and noted that those who experienced early childhood trauma are often more risk than others who don't at needing their services later in life. And so, building resilience really focused on reducing the likelihood that they would see clients see these same clients later in life. And just in our community alone, which is not a fairly, I can't think of the actual populations, but it's not a huge community, but 32%, 1 in 3 children are abused physically or sexually, have been exposed to interpersonal violence. And that doesn't include emotional or physical neglect. And if anyone is aware of I don't know if you've heard of the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, but that's a study that was completed in the States. And if you just Google Adverse Childhood Experiences study, you'll learn that, if we've experienced an adverse childhood event, or depending on the number of ACEs we've experienced in childhood, it will impact our future violence victimization and perpetuation. And also, is linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. So ACEs are quite common in our society. We don't always talk about them, but 61% of adults surveyed across 25 states experienced one type of adverse childhood event. So that's really the context around just acknowledging that trauma is pervasive in our community. Around the principle of safety, trust, and control, obviously we emphasized physical and emotional safety. We had a social worker present to support. I mentioned the fact that our facilitators were all field certified. We have the golden rule, which is reflective of the field work that is around mutual respect for horse and human. Participants were invited to participate, so their participation was voluntary. So some nights they chose just to hang out in the circle and not participate with the horses. They were encouraged gently to participate. But we also provided options, modifications, and choice. So depending on the activity, if there was a need, for example, to be physically connected to complete the activity as a group, sometimes we would adjust that activity to reflect the needs of the participants who might not be comfortable with somebody in their personal bubble. So that's how we reflected that. In terms of connection, we focused on a number of different areas of connection. So connection to self. So we used mandalas as part of our program. Often we would do a mandala type activity as part of our warm-up. And what might that look like? So we might start off by saying, if you were a color, if your emotions were a color right now, color in your mandala in the color that you're feeling or experiencing. All the participants received a journal and were encouraged to journal. We had a number of sessions that were focused on mindfulness. Our farm also includes a labyrinth, so we've built a stone labyrinth, so we incorporate the labyrinth into the program as well. In terms of human-to-human connection, we would obviously there was connection, a check-in, both at the beginning of each circle, just to see how everyone was, what kind of week they're having, and then a check-in as part of closing. Sometimes participants would need some one-on-one support throughout the evening or session, and so that support was provided by the social worker. Human to horse, obviously, we incorporated equine-assisted learning, and then just connection to our natural wisdom. So they were encouraged to, reflect when they were thinking, whether they were sensing, whether they were feeling, when their intuition was influencing their experience. So that's how we reflected the principle of connection. Compassion, the compassion is really more reflected in the feedback that we, obviously being compassionate about the needs of the horses, the needs of the participants, and our own self-compassion. This is, these are the quotes that you see here are just a reflection of quotes that some of the participants shared. So today I journaled a lot that helped. This is actually Samson. Samson's one of our herd members. He is a Clydesdale Belgium cross with a bit of a story of his own, and he's a big, gentle soul. So again, dear Samson, you made me feel special, like I mattered to somebody. I'm going to miss everybody here. So you can see some compassion reflected. In terms of emotion regulation, again, I talked about our use of mandalas. So another activity that we did with the mandalas is inviting participants to draw a self-portrait of their inner critic and their inner champion. And they weren't required to share that obviously with the group. They could if they chose to. We always started each night with a grounding activity, so we incorporated grounding activities before working with the horses. They were also provided with handouts and other material to reinforce the grounding activity that was shared. We used the emotion message map, which is a tool from the field program as well, and reflects the work of Carla McLaren. And then obviously the EAL activities were intended to invite deeper emotion regulation, for example, reflective grooming with the horses. And we also invited participants at the end of each session in different ways. They were invited to express gratitude. So the first night, for example, they were invited to write a thank you note to the horse that they connected with. One night we had them write thank you notes to other group members. They might have written a thank you note to the program, the executive director of KSAC, but again, it's just fostering that sense of gratitude. The other principle is strength-based focus on learning skills. So again, each evening there was an intention around or a skill deliberately included or part of the program. And this is just an example of the tools that were provided to them in terms of a grounding tool. The comments that you see here, again, are reflective of some of the participants. So today I learned I can say no. People are always telling me that I need to say no, but it was very difficult for me to do. Stay calm, breathe, clear your mind. Today I learned to take charge of different situations. So the intent here was to build their strengths. I share these stones because our second final night, participants are invited to choose a stone and summarize a word, their experience in one word, and that was the night that we walked the labyrinth. And they're invited to place the stones on the labyrinth. And these are a reflection of some of the words that came back to us. And this is just a reflection of one group, but bonding, empathy, empowered, calming, worthy, mindful. So to me, that really speaks to a strength-based program that is outcome oriented. In terms of the principle of collaboration, so obviously we couldn't have done this even with the partnership between the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre and the 3 organizations that were involved. We were dependent on our community connections for participant referrals. So KSAC had a number of referring agencies. We worked with Peterborough Youth Services, Victim Services, the Peterborough Police Victim Services, Northumberland, the Mental Health Association, the school board. We had a number of referrals through Student Success, Mon Ami, which is a children's services organization, the Child and Youth Clinic at our local hospital, and the Sexual Health Unit at the hospital as well. So how did we how did we foster that collaboration and build, if you work in the social services sector, you know that it's important when you're partnering with somebody that there is trust and credibility and credentials. And so what we did was we hosted what we called a series of community champion days, where we invited those referring organizations or individuals to participate in a day of activities that reflected the actual program. And this is just a picture of that group. So it was half a day, but it also was, again, a community capacity building initiative where we would talk about how we incorporate trauma-informed programming into other organizations and how that could be reflected in their own programming and day-to-day services. So I'm going to switch now to talk about the actual research component of the project. I've shared with you what the program looked like and how it was structured. And before I get into the qualitative or quantitative part of the research, I'm just going to again reflect on some of the qualitative feedback. So this is again a letter of thanks from one of the participants. Thank you for helping make this program. It helps me so much. It makes you feel as if nothing is in your way. You get so involved in the moment with the horses, you feel nothing around you matters. It's breathtaking, and the staff amazing. Thank you. So I share that with you. And the artwork that you're seeing as well is artwork that was created by one of the participants. So in a follow-up session, in I think the 6-month check-in, we invite participants to come back to the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre, and they're invited to create a piece of artwork with one of the horses reflected in the artwork that they connected to, and they're also invited to put in an affirmation or some reassuring words for future participants. And we actually hang the artwork in, with the choice of participants, we hang the artwork in our barn. So that's another way we've kind of incorporated it. And I should mention as well too, so with our 1 month and our 6-month check-in, those check-ins or those booster sessions, the focus of those sessions is creative expression, and they occur at the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. And then our 1-year check-in, so just imagine trying to get teenagers back into the same place a year later, occurs back at the farm because there's incentive in reconnecting with the horses, which is the draw. So I'm going to talk about the research, and what I will share is these results reflect a presentation that Dr. Kiefer presented last year at the Inviting Resilience Conference hosted at Trent. And while the slide reflects 9 groups and 61 participants, we've now hosted 12 groups with 80 participants, and we're just in the process of sort of creating the final research results. We still have some data that needs to be included. But we know that attendance is an important factor contributing to program outcomes. And as I mentioned earlier, the EAL module really elicited consistently high attendance rates, with 3/4 of the participants attending over half of the EAL sessions and 2/3 of the participants attending at least 6 to 8 sessions. And when the participants did miss a session, it was usually because of life circumstances. They might have had a prom or they were working, and not associated with their reported experience at the program. So, so our attendance for a program of this nature was good. I'm also sharing, this is an example, or this is the session feedback form that they had each participant completed at the end of each night or at the end of each session. And they were asked to rate and comment on their experience at the session. And so the perceived value of the program by participants is another important factor contributing to program outcomes. And clients who believe the program to be useful and well aligned with their needs and goals obviously will engage more thoroughly and authentically in the intervention process, which in turn is necessary for realizing the full impact. So they were invited to, provide, let us know how they felt about the session. Was it helpful? Did they feel comfortable with the group? And that's an important question, because we would know based on this feedback form if there were some group members that they weren't ready for group. And our group let us, we knew that intuitively, or based on, some of the experiences we had with a particular individual in group, but our group also let us know. They were invited to let us know what they learned or discovered for themselves in the session, what emotions the session evoked in them, what tools and strategies from the session you will use, and what you'd like to remember about the session. This is just an example again of a quote from one participant: "Thinking of my past week, a lot has gone on with my case, and the horse made me light up and stand taller." And so that's the type of feedback we would get at the end of each session. And so just reflecting on that, this is actually a slide that reflects that type of feedback. So for any given session, at least 2/3 of the participants indicated they were mostly or very satisfied with the session. They were comfortable with the group. They found the session helpful and they learned something valuable. They also, I think it's also important to note that participants who expressed deriving more satisfaction, learning, and value from these sessions actually showed greater improvement in their resilience factors or indicators, and they experienced less decline in their mental health indicators following completion of the program. Having said that, in contrast, these outcomes were not realized for participants who reported getting less value out of the EAL sessions. As well, obviously it's important to note that the unique value of learning with horses is reflected in their participant comments like these. And I just invite you to take a moment to read them. Over and above what the quantitative and the qualitative research tells us, just being a witness to the participants' experience let us know that there was value in them connecting with the horses in this way. So in terms of the actual, the actual assessment form, so We also collected standardized assessments of depression and post-traumatic symptoms, socio-emotional competencies, and the three-factor model of resiliency. So as I noted earlier, participants completed these assessments 1 week before before the start of the 10-week program. 1 week after they completed the program, at the 1-month follow-up, the 6-month follow-up, and the 12-month follow-up. And we compared changes in these outcomes between those participants who experienced higher versus lower to see if the perceived value of the program moderated the outcomes. And overall, the program had stronger effects for resilience-related outcomes, i.e. competencies and skills, than for mental health outcomes. And I think that's important to note, specifically clinical and emotional symptoms. And this pattern of results really could be explained by the specificity, I can't even say that word, by the unique nature of our participants. Many have had, I would say that many of them had elevated levels of depressive symptoms. Some of them were still in crisis when they were in group at the start of the program. And we noted that there is corroborating evidence from past EAL studies and that the EAL effects are less pronounced for participants with a clinical mental health diagnosis. And I should note as well that our intention, the intention around this program, was that it was not intended to be clinical therapy, that it was intended to be a strengths-based, trauma-informed program designed to develop skills and competencies related to resilience. So now I'm going to talk about some of the results. This is an example of the depressive symptoms, and this sort of reinforces what I've just shared with you. So these are the depressive symptoms that were pre-test, post-test, and at 1 month follow-up. And in this and in the subsequent graphs that I'm going to show you, the green solid line represents participants who perceive greater value from the program. So that is what we call the highly satisfied group in that original feedback form. And the gray dashed line represents participants who had perceived lower value. So the somewhat to mostly satisfied group. And the numbers on the vertical are standardized T-scores, where a score of 50 represents an average level of depressive symptoms for women of this age group. So you can see that in our sample, depressive symptoms were higher than average. In fact, they were in the clinically elevated range, which is a T-score of 65. And they remained at this elevated level after the program, even increased for those who said they weren't getting as much from the program. We feel this finding isn't actually surprising because, as I noted, building internal resilience through horses was not intended to be clinical therapy. And in their session feedback, most participants reported experiencing a full gamut of emotions: sad, anxious, happy, calm. And the sadness emotion emerged and resurfaced from session to session and reflected that elevated depressive state. And the other thing I will note too is, particularly around the 1 month or the end of they were sad that the program was over. There was the fact that something was coming to an end. In terms of the post-trauma symptoms, a similar picture emerged. So we noted that their post-traumatic symptoms didn't decrease much following the program. Some participants continued experiencing adversity while they were in the program. And what I mean by that is their home life was in crisis. Although they did state that being around the horses created a calming effect. So our program didn't have much impact on emotional and clinical symptoms, but that in and of itself doesn't indicate a lack of resilience. One can be resilient while experiencing adverse health, as I noted earlier in my presentation. And we were really much more we were interested in the resilience indicators, and what we did see there were positive outcomes, at least for those who said they derived greater value for the program. So that's where I'm going to focus now. So the first element is around emotional awareness, and we saw a maintained increase in emotional awareness. Participants gained greater understanding of their emotions, and each night we would cover different emotions as part of our psychoeducation, as well as talk about the emotions that came up at the session. They also gained understanding of the effects of their emotional expressions on others. They were also more accepting of their emotional experiences, both positive and especially negative. So as noted in these quotes, I learned how to look at my emotions and had the horses help with understanding them. I learned how giving a calm energy can create a calm surrounding. I learned that it's okay to be nervous, but it's even better to let yourself be present. So I know myself, and when I read this now, I'm moved all over again about the program. In terms of stress management, there was also a surprising result for stress management. It showed a decrease after the program, even though participants' feedback was the opposite, as you can note from these quotes. We think this may have had something to do with our measure of stress management, which focused on the ability to control one's negative emotions, whereas our program really instead focused on letting oneself experience fully all emotions, positive and negative, and learning strategies to tolerate rather than suppress those aversive experiences. So the decrease in stress management scores may also reflect a more realistic appraisal of what effective emotion regulation is. Throughout the program, some participants may have realized that they actually really didn't have healthy ways of managing their stress, like cutting, for example. In terms of social skills, apart from learning self-awareness, participants who derived greater value from the program also showed an increase in their social skills, although it didn't seem to sustain at the 1-month follow-up. Specifically, participants said they learned to pay attention to and understand the emotions of others, as well as communicate their own needs to others better. And many also commented on becoming better at setting boundaries and respecting others' space. So again, noted in the quotes, I learned that it's easy to think that you don't know how a person is feeling, but it's easy if you look at their body. Today I felt very courageous, proud, because I learned how to say no, which is difficult. The horses taught me about how to understand personal space and respect for space. In terms of a sense of relatedness, we saw especially clear and sustained increase in a sense of relatedness. Participants learned to recognize the common humanity of their experiences, to be more open to asking for help and to giving help to others. And particularly prominent was the theme of regained trust. So that came out in their feedback as well. So again, I learned that everyone is going through hard times and there's people who understand what I'm going through. I learned to listen to people and lean on people for help. I learned that I can still trust even after having my trust broken a lot. In terms of a sense of mastery, last but not least, we also saw gains in the sense of mastery as participants overcame their nervousness of working with horses and gained control in leading a horse without coercion, which boosted their sense of self-confidence. Again, I learned to take charge in difficult situations. One of the activities, for example, had participants providing direction. And so it was wonderful to see a young woman discover for the first time that she had natural leadership skills. I learned that being confident isn't hard. Today's session made me feel like the boss and confident, having a grasp on leading the horse without feeling any sense of doubt. I can apply what I learned today to my personal life. So all in all, our program is a promising approach to building core resilience-related competencies, at least for those who found greater value in the sessions. I think an advantage of our program relative to other community programs is the higher participation rate. Obviously, a program isn't of great value if the participants don't come or stop coming. On the flip side, we recognize that our program by itself is not sufficient to treat clinical levels of mental health problems, but the boost to resilience capacity might just be enough to empower a person to seek additional help. And what we have experienced, or what we have noted, is that a number of participants who were in building internal resilience through horses received ongoing counseling or sought out ongoing counseling from the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. So they were well supported post-program as well. And we also know that our program is not an approach that suits everyone. We had some participants who didn't derive as much value or response to the intervention. Some people aren't necessarily attracted to working with horses. And we know that there's never going to be one size fits all a solution. So I think that's why it's essential to build a diverse range of supports and resources in the community. I'll just note these were posters. So our initiative was supported by a number of research students, specifically Nicole Oates and Roya Garamani, who were students at Trent University and working under the direction of Dr. Kiefer. And these were their poster presentations that were shared at the Inviting Resilience Conference last year. And the most recent milestone of the project is we now have a Building Internal Resilience Through Horses community manual that reflects all of the information that I just shared with you. It's available for download at invitingresilience.ca. It's available for therapists, social workers, equine program facilitators, offering skill-based equine-assisted learning. We are working on a French version that will be posted later this year. And the manual, I can show you a picture of the actual manual. It's pretty awesome. The manual, and this is actually my daughter and my daughter Sarah and my horse Sunny. It includes the detailed session designs, the practical considerations for program delivery, the research approach, and some of the tools and handouts that we used as part of the initiative. So this is a free resource that is available for download at invitingresilience.ca. I thought I would just, I would sort of conclude my presentation by just sharing with you. I think it's important to note, you know, what were some of the things we learned as a partnership, because this was being part of, you know, being part of a partnership can be a learning experience. And one of the things that I think was a success tool for us was having a memorandum of understanding between all three parties that really outlined the terms of the agreement, our project work plan, what we were each accountable for, financial contributions and responsibilities, how we would communicate, how we would handle conflict, and conflict does come up, how we make decisions, how we manage our information. So, you know, we're ensuring that the privacy of participants is protected, ensuring that we have insurance. Obviously, we have lots of liability insurance. And all of anyone who participated as a facilitator needed to have insurance as well. And just, you know, outlining conflict of interest. We also had a project management plan, again, to help us sort of keep on track in terms of deadlines and accountabilities and timelines. And what I will share is expect the unexpected. So even in a 3-year period, we had personnel changes, you know, it just things that came up that reflect the human factor in any kind of project that we had to, sometimes we had to pivot and negotiate as they came up. And most of the time that was related to individuals who were supporting the program, not the actual participants. So those were some of our key learnings. And this is where I thought I would open it up to questions, if anyone has a question. I guess if you have a question, we can either just do, we could do questions by having, Linda, I don't know if you want to do that.
Sure, yeah, people want to come off their video
We
and
can have,
mute if you want
there's
to
10
do
participants, so
questions.
maybe we have people just come on, come off
Yeah,
their video. If you have any
sure, let's do
questions.
that. You want to pop off video and pop off your mute?
Anybody? I noticed there are a couple of comments.
Eileen is off.
I'm getting there slowly.
That's okay, no rush. There we go.
Not so much question, just wow, you covered so much, but not in an overwhelming presentation. I really was able to absorb so much, and you drilled down to such detail too.
Great.
So phenomenal program that you do, great presentation, and thanks for sharing all that. That was amazing, and all the free services, all the free links.
Yeah, good.
Cool.
Does anyone else have a question? Margaret?
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. That was really comprehensive and so interesting. I had a question about how the participants, when you recruited participants, was the fact that it was a research project a barrier to any participants?
So they were given the choice. So they could participate in the program and not be part of the research.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we had a few who chose not to be part of the research, but participated in the program, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Was there a percentage based on the funding for the research of how many?
I couldn't tell you that.
Okay, so that wasn't a requirement to the funding.
Yeah, it didn't, I mean, it wasn't a huge barrier. It didn't present itself as a huge barrier, let's put it that way. The number of participants who chose not to participate in the research was pretty small. And the way we present, I mean, we acknowledged, I mean, it was presented as a research project as part of the participant assessment, recruitment, all of that. And the project itself, like their consent forms, I mean, it was part of an ethics review board at Trent Research Ethics Review Board at Trent. So a lot of those boxes were ticked prior to the launch of the program.
Jennifer, Cindy here. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Hi, Cindy.
How are you doing?
Good.
I reached out to UWO on a few occasions and I got no response back from them with regards to, you know, updated information, collaborating, that type of thing within the London area. So I don't know if you can provide like a way of contacting some of these groups, how you were successful in that, or.
So, sorry, who did you reach out to?
The UWO group at Western.
Oh, the Western group. Oh, well, I can't
Yeah.
speak. I can't speak for the Western group. What I can tell you is, my relationship with the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre, and I don't know if you have is there a sexual assault center in London?
Yeah,
I don't
maybe.
know.
I
Like
mean,
it's one of those.
looked
It really depends. It depends on the agency. I mean, you know that every agency is different. Every community is different. I am grateful for the openness that the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre demonstrated by, like, it was a leap of faith for all of us, quite frankly, and it worked out.
Yeah, I just have to keep, I mean, and then of course, you know, things happen, right? So with COVID and all that, but
Yeah.
I guess I'll just have to keep pushing forward with some of that.
Oh, maybe there's another agency.
From a research
Maybe there's, yeah, I mean, I don't know about the research, but certainly from a program perspective, you now have a resource you can use in London. The manual is a program that could be replicated in London.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks.
Cindy, do you need a list of like sexual assault centers and things like that in London?
Yeah, I mean, I can sit down now and start to look at all those different. We do have groups here. I have worked with the London Women's Abuse Centre before, so it would be nice to know, with Western having sort of their own program there, it would have been nice to have like the context or have that to see how they reached out to the groups and the ones that are affiliated with UWO. Because if you're doing with the UWO thing or Western University, you know, that's where your research would start at the university level, right?
Yeah, our research is, yeah, you're right. So we found somebody, we just happened to find somebody in our community who was an expert in resilience. And so our research is being handled through Trent University, but maybe there's another, maybe there's another department within Western, maybe.
Well, there is. I mean, I worked with them. I've worked with them. You have to go through an institution or a university in order to have your program approved, right? Through your IRB. So you have to have that approved, that ethics, because the consent form has to be approved, and all those research steps, they have to be approved through a university, essentially. So each university has their own IRB. And that's how, so working with Trent put that through their IRB in order to get that program approved and that consent form approved, because that protocol has to, all of the steps of that have to be approved. So that's why I kind of reached out. I kind of passed all of that stuff and reached right out to UWO, because I already knew that I had to go through them and their ethics review board in order to push any research forward. But it was just, I more wanted to open that door up, because of course, clinical research is my background. I wanted to open that door up to see what programs that perhaps we could bring the equine-assisted learning component into some of the other programs that they're, or projects that they're currently working on, but I wasn't really that successful yet.
Yeah.
Because that's how you're going to build, the importance of equine-assisted learning, pushing that forward, because then you're going to have your papers written, you're going to have your affiliations, you're going to have all of those types of things. So and it is still clinical, because once you have your full results, you're going to have your papers, you've already done your poster presentations, you have all of that to back up to back it up. You have the data to back that up. So at some point you have to, in order to push equine-assisted learning forward, we have to keep building on the pieces that we're putting together now.
Yep, I agree.
That's the importance. Yeah, that's the importance of it.
Any other questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't see everybody's. I can't see everybody, so I'm just gonna say, speak up if you have a question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
Okay, I'll just take off this. I was just wondering what your next step is, because now that the program is over, are you going to continue offering the same kind of programs, or?
That's a good question. We are working on program sustainability. We did have one last group booked in March to finish the program that was disrupted by COVID. So we're trying to figure out how we complete that work this fall at the farm. I think really at this point, I mean, I'd love to be able to say, I mean, we need the funding, the program needs to be funded from some source in order to continue. And at this point, our funding was the Public Health Agency of Canada, and that funding is coming to an end at the end of this year. So KSAC and I we've continued discussions. We will probably use the initial program to source other forms of funding. It's helpful to have something that you can show, and the manual is, a product that we can show and demonstrate the efficacy of the program. So that's where we're at right now.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's a really important key piece, is that program manual. that you can share with others, so you have that baseline, like you say, to use.
So
use
you
it in
can
your
download
day-to-day
that
practice.
manual at invitingresilience.ca.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to see if people pick it up and the results of, you talked about sustainability, but the results of other programs. So if somebody in the States picks it up, how do you connect and see what their results are?
Right.
Well, we will be asking for information as part of the download process. So our intent would be to kind of monitor where, I mean, and ideally, in a perfect world, if somebody's offering the program, they're honoring the name of the program. They're not repackaging the program under their own brand, so to speak. That's obviously a risk when you basically give somebody a 10-week program or curriculum. So our hope is that people will continue to call it building internal resilience through horses, and we would monitor it that way.
Nice. Excellent. Any further questions? I think we are. All right. So I'm just going to pop back on here. All right. So thank you, Jennifer. That was
Thank you.
comprehensive. It was so nice to see from when you wrote the article 3 years ago to see where it is now and the results you have gotten. And you know, I hear you talking, and I just think of the lives you've changed. And the lives, you know, we were talking about research and quantitative, qualitative, and all that, but just to think back, like to really drill it down, to think of the lives that have been changed, that have the tools now, and the horses that memory of the horses they can always go back to. I always think in workshops we always say, you know, you can always go back to that thought of the horses and that memory, and have that calming and that grounding. So
it's been life-changing for me.
I bet it has. Yeah. All right, with that said, I'm going to post this later on today, and I encourage you guys to go over to just because we've been creating all these connections, we have a group called Humanity Needs the Horses. If you head on over there, it's a private group, we'll let you in, and really continuing these conversations and introducing yourself. We have just people from around the world that are presenting. We have people from around the world that are participating. And if we can continue these conversations, it's amazing who we get to know and what programs we learn about, just like yours. So if you want to do that, that's great. Like I say, we'll putting these all on our Equine Leadership YouTube channel, and these ones should be up tonight. And Jennifer, I will do my best at putting a lot of what you talked about here today and some of the books that you spoke of. I might connect with you to figure out exactly what they were, but I did my best.
Oh, okay.
And you'll put all that up so people have that to go by too.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our story.
Very much so. Very much so. And thank you guys for participating. And with that, we will say good night, goodbye, and we will see you all in the morning. Okay, thanks.
Right.
Take
Thank you
care.
so much.
Thank you.
Jen, can you just pop up that final slide?
I can't. They're stuck again.
It's stuck. Okay,
Hold on.
About it. That's okay. Not a worry.